What's up? What's up? It's your boy Sean P back again. Another edition of Hip Hop Roundtable Reviews. So, finally, we're going to give the final verdict on J. Cole, The Fall Off. Dropped last Friday and has been all the talk of hip hop over the last week or so. Um, it seems like it's going to be a big win and a pretty big win for J. Cole, and I think a big win for hip hop. It's slated to sell close to or over 300,000 the first week. That's big. That's the big. That would be the biggest first debut total really since GNX. If I'm not believe, I think it's about GNX. Um, Maybe Chromacopia might have had a bigger first week totals, but I think it is. So that's huge if he does that. Even if he does 250K, that's great. But this year's really gotten off to a hot start, and I think it was a masterful job of J. Cole coming out um early in the year to get that out of the way and get this hip hop year really off to a hot start, which it did. So we're going to get the final verdict. We're going to do what we usually do. I'm going to talk about what I like, what I didn't like. We're going to sum it up in the end. We'll talk a little bit about the backlash and why people may not have liked the album. You know what I mean? I'll probably share some of the sentiments of some of the online pundits and online criticism that's come out there. But we'll get to it. So let's get started. Let's do what we usually do. Let's pull up the playlist. Um, all right, The Fall Off by J. Cole. All right, so let's get this thing rocking. What did I like on this? Well, this is real hip hop at its finest, I think. I'm glad that J. Cole came with this record and came with a traditional, real, more of a boom bap style album for the masses, for the mainstream. Of course, it was modernized with, harmonization because he was singing on songs or what have you. But I think he had a very good mix of, hardcore rap, stories, traditional, if you want to call it underground sound, and also a mix of melodies, a little bit of Afro beats and R&B, along with a lot of classic samples that paid homage to the 90s and the early 2000s. This was an homage paying album, which I like. He had, a classic Mobb Deep sample on here. P. Pablo was on here. Erica Badu was on here. Like, I like that aspect that he was really paying homage to the golden era of hip hop. I think some of the songs on here, like I Still Love Her and What If, basically had a 90s feel to it, talking about Biggie and Pac, and also covering or modernizing Common's 1995 classic. You know what I mean? I Used to Love Her. But yeah, this was a very good, well-rounded Okay, we're back, and my screen is not sharing. A little bit of a technical difficulty. The power went out apparently, so I'm gonna pull back up the album, and we'll get back to our discussion at hand about the fall off. So, back to what I was saying. Yeah, I like this is a real hip hop heads album with a good mix of a little bit of Afro beats. Burner Boy was on there. I'll get to the features in a minute. Um, a great concept records, a great conceptual feel where I think he came with a lot of people say they're not original concepts, but I think they're more plays off of concepts that were done before. For example, you know, the fall off is inevitable, with telling the story backwards, but I think it's almost more of a kind of a modernized version of Rewind. Um I go to some of the other songs on there. The Villist, which used a very classic Mob Deep sample, you know what I mean, on the Realist, you know what I mean, uh, which is on Murder Music. It had an East Coast vibe to it. You know what I mean? Definitely had an East Coast vibe to it. So overall, I think it was cohesive, well put together. And I like the concept of J. Cole returning to Fayetteville at 29 and again at 39 to show the maturity in him and where is as a person, and how he's grew as a man, coming back to, his roots. So it was a good lot of great stories, a great storytelling album. Like if you like stories, you'll definitely like this. Had some of the elements, like he gave me a very nostalgic Nas vibe. He had like a Nas mid 2010s vibe. Some of the flows on here were reminiscent of Eminem on some of the melodic songs. Like, so he had a real classic hip hop vibe on this album that I liked. You know what I mean? But overall, it's a well done album. It was good, you know. So a good listen. You know what I mean? Definitely a good listen. So we'll get into before I get to what I didn't like. Let's talk about some of the standout tracks on here. Standout tracks. Let me get my banners up. Let me see. Yeah, best songs on here. So let's talk about it. Um, Safety, I got on repeat, man. That might be, excuse me, my favorite song on there. Great story. Story about a conversation. It's him having a conversation, coming back to the hood. And basically, his old buddies coming back, having a conversation with him on what went on when he was out of town. So yeah, definitely the vibe, the melody has a real East Coast '90s hip hop vibe. Maybe my future track, my favorite track on there. Um, I like Poor Thing, hardcore story about a dude that he had trouble with coming back to the hood and addressing somebody that he had differences with years back. Definitely like the hardcore street energy of that. I like Legacy, dope vibe track, dope vibe track. I like that. And Bunts Road Blues, I think it's fire. Alchemist did that beat. The collaboration with Future, Thames on there, the back and forth melodies at the end. That's another candidate for the best song on there. Definitely like that. Like the story vibe on there. Who the fuck is you is probably the hardest bars track on there, I would say. With the beat switch up in there. A lot of energy on that. Classic Mob Deep sample on that one. drum and bass, which is shows his lyrical dexterity on there. You know, basically, it's kind of like a flex record a little bit. You know what I mean? Definitely fuck with that. Shows his lyrical strength on there. Uh, and I like "Lonely at the Top," which has a Benny the Butcher sample, and he kind of like gives a feeling of he feels left out in this generation. It's kind of a it's kind of a pay homage, but at the same time, he's basically admitting he's uninspired by this generation. You know what I mean? And he missed out on being on in the golden generation. So or the classic era. So really the first disc was pretty much cut for cut. I don't think there was a weak cut on there. Now on disc 39, I like the intro. The singing at the beginning was a little bit too long, but he just flexes when the beat switch up happens. Flexes bar wise on there. Loves that. Fall off is inevitable. We already covered that single with the story being told backwards. Love that. The Villist, I dig it now. You know, it took me a while to warm up to it because it's maybe my favorite Mobb Deep song of all time, a Cool G rap that he covered, but he represented on that pretty good. Old Dog with Petey Pablo, another banger. That's probably going to be a single off of there. Only You with Burna Boy, Afrobeats vibe, nice vibe record, chill summertime record like that. I Love Her Again, which is maybe my favorite track on there. I think that Bunts Road Blues, what was it? Bunts Road Blues, was it? Yeah, Bunts Road Blues and Safety are probably my favorite tracks on there because it captures exactly how I feel about the hip hop game today, which personifies hip hop as a female. And What If, I like the concept on that record as well. The Biggie and Pac, and you know, basically saying, you know, really what would happen if we really all come together. And I think it's not a shot or a criticism, but I think it is a subtle reference to Drake and Kendrick Lamar, even though he didn't address the situation head on. So definitely I like that. And those are my standout tracks on there, on the album. So for the best songs. So what did I not like? All right, let's get to that. Well, I'll say this: there's not a lot of weak moments on there, but I do think the energy on this album could have picked up. You know, there was an element of it was a little bit too slow, but I know why he did that. He did that because he wanted to accentuate his lyrics and his lyrical style. But there were no bangers on here. I'm not gonna say there weren't any bangers. I think 2-6 and the joint with Petey Pablo, I think are street bangers. Old Dog. I'll probably also say Who the Fuck Is You is kind of a banger. But there's nothing in there that's gonna get you hype. You know what I mean? The energy is kind of down tempo. The production could have been better. The production was decent, not stand out. Even with an Alchemist track on there, could have used more energy with the beats on here. What else was on there? I think that was it, and really the length. It's so hard to pull off a double album these days because, of course, everybody's gonna look at and compare it to, you know, Life After Death and All Eyes on Me and Wu Tang Forever, and I don't think any double album is gonna live up to that status anymore. It's so hard to pull that off today, and I think the double album aspect of this was kind of a mistake. He if he would have made this a 17 cut album, we might be talking classic on our hands. You know what I mean? But or album of the year category, I'll say that. Album of the year to classic. But yeah, it was just too long. You know what I mean? And of course, which we're going to talk about in the backlash aspect of this, he didn't address the elephant in the room. I really wanted a song that he was basically going to explain and kind of talk about what happened, you know, with the Kendrick, the Drake fiasco, pulling out of the battle, apologizing, all of that. I just really want to know why you made 7 Minute Drill. That's all I want to know. Why was that song made? Now, my theory is, and the speculation, I think Drake baited him into that battle. They were going on tour. All of the hoopla with Like That came out when they were coming off tour. And I think Drake wanted to get somebody on his side because he saw Future and Ross and ASAP and all these rappers coming at him subliminally along with Kendrick. So I think he wanted to get his own team. And I think the original plan was, you know, Cole was going to drop a diss record and then he was going to follow up with push-ups right after. So both were coming at Kendrick. But, you know, he had a stream of conscience. And now that I really think about it, it makes sense why he pulled out. And so many years later, 2 years later, it probably was the best move because I don't think Cole would have had the stamina to go 6 songs for Kendrick Lamar. You know what I mean? And I think he would have probably have lost too. It would have been a better lyrical battle, but you know, he didn't address that. You know, and on an album that's with stories and is personal, I think they needed to address it. You know what I mean? I think he definitely needed to address it. So that was what I didn't like. You know what I mean with it. So there were criticisms. Now, along with that came media backlash. You know, I found that a lot of the reviewers from Dead End Hip Hop to Rory and Mal to I think who else? DJ Academics talked about it. What's his name? My man Jay Nolan. My man, shout out Jay Nolan. Check his pod out. Definitely like, share, subscribe to him. A lot of the people liked it, but they didn't love it. You know what I mean? And the sentiments that I got was, you know, it was the typical sentiments. The double album thing didn't work. I know on Dead End Hip Hop, they really went in on Cole not having enough energy. You know what I mean? And they kept referencing, you know, the energy of, you know, he should have had more energy and come with more of an aggressive style on this album. But if he came with an aggressive style, people were going to criticize him for talking his shit and pulling out the battle. So he was kind of in a rock and a hard place to do that. And I think he did have a nice balance on this album with doing that. But they basically said, oh yeah, Joe Budden's podcast came out and said it's what you love and what you hate about J. Cole, you know, where his albums can be a little bit boring, you know. So there was a lot of criticism of it. I know Dead End Hip Hop, they criticized What If and saying that, oh, he's not even part of the Biggie and Pac generation. And I got to push back on that one because J. Cole is what, 40 years old? So that means when Biggie died, he was what? What was he's what, 12 years old? You know what I mean? 11 years old, 10 years old. That's about the time, maybe a little bit earlier than that that kids start listening to hip hop. So he knew about Biggie and Pac back then. So I totally pushed back on that. And I think what they really wanted to say is that he should be talking about Kendrick and Drake piecing it up, not Biggie and Pac, even though it was referencing in a creative way, Kendrick and Drake. Well, they didn't think it was creative enough. They were saying, "Oh, he was biting flows on there. He's taking Eminem's flows." And I look at it as paying homage. You know what I mean? This is a real hip hop, and it fit the tone of the album. That's the important part. It fit the tone of the album. You know, so in the end of the day, I mean, I think people were a little bit nitpicky with it. And even though they were doing that, they all gave it a good review. They all said it was a good album, pretty much. I think the album's a win. Now, in terms of J. Cole overall, this does fit the mode of his catalog, where I think J. Cole, his issue is there's a little bit left to be desired. You know what I mean? Like, he could have had more energy and more oomph, if you will, behind his music, I always draw the parallel to Nas. J. Cole, to me, you could make parallels that he is the Nas of this 2010s era, where he's going to go down as a GOAT of this era. He's got classics. He's one of the best lyricists, arguably the best lyricist of this era and this generation, But just like Nas, despite having It Was Written in Illmatic, everybody said there was something missing that made Nas a little bit boring. And I think J. Cole kind of has the same moniker with him. And it wasn't until Nas finally won a Grammy and had the Hit Boy run that I think people really fully embraced Nas as one of the greatest of all time. Before, I thought it was a little bit of a question, even with It Was Written in Illmatic, because of his beat selection, which I had no problem with his beat selection, because of his subject matter, his storytelling. And I think J. Cole's in the same boat. Now, the other thing, I think he needs a producer. Before I get to my next point, I think he does need a producer that's going to really bring the life out, bring life to him, make him feel alive, more lively. Like, he does need more of a Hit Boy. You know what I mean? He does need, I don't know about a Metro Boomin, but I think a Hit Boy would be really good or work really well with J. Cole, because she would give him enough energy, beat wise, but at the same time, he could still get the best out of his lyrics, like a Nas. You know what I mean? I'd like to see J. Cole feature with more OGs. I'd like to see him work with a Nas or a Rick Ross or a Jadakiss or those type of rappers. I think he fits that mold. But the big thing is, J. Cole is saying this is his last album and he's retiring. Now, I always think that when a rapper says they retire, they're not really retired. If you're 40 years old, you're still in your prime. Rappers' primes go from like 25 to like 50, And to me, if you don't have a really successful bag, or a bag that's doing much better for you than rap music, I don't think you should retire. I really don't. Like, Jay-Z, he should retire. I mean, he doesn't need to rap anymore. I think Nas is at the point, money-wise, with his casino deals, with Mass Appeal, with his outside ventures, the Bitcoin and all that, he could retire now. You know what I mean? Um, rappers like a Ludacris, who's an actor, you know, he could retire. They have something to fall back on. I don't know outside of rapping, what does J. Cole really have? So why are you walking away? You know what I mean? So I mean the retirement thing, I kind of don't get. I think it's a little bit of a gimmick. It's a little bit trying to get people to come back to the yard for one more time. But in my opinion, I think J. Cole is not gonna walk away just like that. You know what I mean? I think we haven't seen the last of J. Cole. Um, he might step away for a couple of years, but I do think he's going to get the juices back and come back with another project, hopefully with a new producer. You know what I mean? Because I do think he needs a producer, even though he does make his own beats. And production wise, he's okay. He's kind of like an Eminem, which they have a lot of kind of darker down tempo um beats, you know what I mean? But it does bring the best lyrically out of those rappers, you know? So excuse me, that's the backlash on it. And I think it had a lot of backlash, but a lot of people agreed it was a pretty good album. I mean, some of the critics were a little bit harsh on it, but the fans are really liking this album. You know what I mean? Fans are really liking this album. So let's sum it up. Let's get to the scorecard. What do we got here? So lyrics overall, I am going to go with a 9 out of 10. Got a lot of lyrical dexterity on here. Wordplay was good. Strong storytelling made me feel like I was in a movie. Gave me elements of Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, a little bit of Good Kid, Mad City. Not to say it was those albums are better than those albums, but he gave me those vibes. But I really related to the stories, and I felt like I was in the conversation with him. So it was a lot of realism there. I go with a strong 9 out of 10. Production, I'm gonna have to bring this down a bit. I'm gonna have to go with about a 7 on this one. The production was solid, but it did lack energy. Like there could have been more bangers on here, even though I don't think that was his goal. I think people came into this looking for like a GNX, you know, big record kind of album, and it was not that kind of record. So I think people's expectations were down on the production, and mine was a little bit too. Even though the beats were pretty solid and pretty good, you know what I mean? Maybe more Alchemist tracks. They could have used more energy, but I'm gonna go with a solid 7 on production on that. Flows and energy. I'm gonna go with the 8. Um, I liked his flows. I think he was diverse. I think he paid homage to certain great MCs with his flows. I think the only thing is maybe it was a little bit too much harmonizing for me, even though the harmonizing was good and he had a good vibe on there. But a little bit too much harmonizing on there. Could have been more rap or maybe some harder records, you know what I mean? But overall, I go with an 8 for flows and energy on that one. Um, let's go to features. Features, I gotta go again with a solid 8. It wasn't many features. Future did his thing. He fit the songs well. I could have heard more singing from Erica Badu, but she did a good job. I think the features were effective. You know what I mean? They did their thing. They didn't outshine J. Cole, and they added enough accompaniment to add something to the song. It wasn't like there was a standout verse on there that really, you know, took away or made people say, you know, J. Cole got out rapped on a song. I think Thames was actually the best feature on here. You know, the back and forth on Bunsen Road Blues. So I go with a solid 8 on features. Replay play value, I'm gonna have to go with the 8 as well. I'm gonna be honest with you, man. At first, I was like, this is gonna take some time to warm up to, but I find myself singing songs that the songs stay in your head on this one, man. The songs, for whatever reason, are catchy. Um, and I actually think this album grows on you. I don't think this album is gonna be something that you're just gonna throw away after like a month. This is gonna stay around for a while. So I go with a solid 8 on replay value. I think it's enough to get your attention for most of the year until some other standout projects come out, you know? So overall rating, where am I going at? I'm gonna go with a solid 8.5 out of 10. I think this project, at first, people are gonna be like, this is a little bit too boring. You know what I mean? At first, people are gonna be like, I don't know, this is a typical J. Cole album. But I think this album's gonna have some staying power. I think they're gonna have a very big first week debut, possibly debuting at debuting at number one, maybe even 300K the first week. I do think it's going to be pretty big the first week, but I think it's something where people this can grow on you. I think some of these songs are going to grow on people. Even something like the Let Out, which is a polarizing song on this album with him singing. Song gives me a lot of Eminem vibes, but the guitars in the background, like it catches you, like it grabs you. You know what I mean? Like, so I think some of these songs are gonna grow on you, and I think this will be in the conversation for album of the year for a minute, but I think it will be topped. I'll say that. I'll go with an 8.5 out of 10. I don't know if it will get to a 9, but I think an 8.5 out of 10. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Alfredo 2 last year, where it took me a while to like kind of get into the vibe because it was a lot of down tempo vibes on it. But after a while, I was rocking it every day. And I was like, oh, I got to go back and listen to this song. Like I was really vibing with it. It kind of reminds me of Alfredo too. But what I will say is, for many, it's not the big budget album they were expecting with all of these bangers and club bangers and, anthems like a GNX. This is not to be compared to a GNX. Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers is more of a comparative album for that. But I go with a solid 8.5 out of 10. It's making my top 10 for this year. I know that, so I'll definitely go with that. 8.5 out of 10. Definitely check this out. And I think people were a little bit harsh on this, critics wise. But again, I think a lot of the people, the reason why they were critical of it is the elephant in the room. He didn't address the battle. And I think a lot of people, low key, even though they didn't want to say it, were still holding J. Cole against that apology. And I think that did take away from people, and they couldn't help but add that in. Like me, I tried to separate it as best I can, and I think he still should have addressed it. But I do think people hung on to that a little bit too long with the battle. I mean, it is what it is. I think really Port Antonio and Clouds was going to be the closest thing they're going to get to an explanation, and that's that. I mean, J. Cole wanted to move on. But anyway, still a good project. I would still go 8.5 out of 10. So in the end of the day, this is a win. This is a win for hip-hop, a win for real hip-hop. I just like the context of this because it brings back real hip hop in the mainstream conversation, which is what we need. A real hip hop album debuting number one to kind of shift the tone of hip hop. Let's get back to creativity. Let's get back to variety and balance in this thing, and enough of the trap slash OnlyFans model type rap. Like, let's get away from that. Let's get back to balance in the game, and I think this does a good job of bringing that balance back on this Fall Off project. So J. Cole Fall Off, 8.5 out of 10. That's my official review. We got some new content coming. Definitely check us out. We're going to have the crew back probably next week on another hip hop topic. This is turning out to be a pretty exciting year in hip hop. A lot of good topics to come with. I'm probably going to get to that, reviewing that game mixtape too. I might try and get to that this weekend, so look out for that. So anyway, enjoy the rest of your night. Check out J. Cole, the Fall Off, 8.5 out of 10. And I'll check out you guys pretty soon with some new content. All right. Peace.